and guide us and help us to our light to dawn on.
Good morning again. It is, we're celebrating Swamiji's birthday, and on one level it would seem, why read our normal Sunday readings and so on his birthday and so on. And in a way, one could make a case for that. And I was wondering this morning whether I should or not. And then I remembered that every Sunday service that occurred after Swamiji's birthday, he often gave the Sunday service and he read the readings. I mean, of course, he wasn't going to say, and since it is my birthday, it was a little different, but still, I thought in that spirit, let us have the readings, even though our main subject for today is Swami Kriyananda. Also, I'm glad I did, because that affirmation this week is for kindness. And Swamiji actually listed that as one of the primary things of his legacy, was kindness. And it's just so perfect that it falls on today. And so today's reading, The Best Way to Worship. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In chapter 4 of the Gospel of St. John, the woman of Samaria asks Jesus, where is the best place to worship? This question might be expanded to include, what is the best church? What is the best religion? Is it important to go on pilgrimage to holy shrines? What is the best ritual? What is the best mantra or prayer? Jesus cut across all questioning with his reply. The hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. It was not that outer considerations of place, church, ritual, etc. are irrelevant. Each person should find those practices and observances which are compatible with his own nature. One might say, with his own vibrations. Not everyone's natural path is the same. God sent different religions into the world to satisfy different human needs. The overarching concern, however, considering that the goal is to find God, is to include in one's worship daily inner communion with the Lord. God is silence. He must be sought, therefore, in inner silence. God is absolute love. He must be sought, therefore, in the silence of love. God is spirit, and thus immaterial. He must be sought above all in the expanding peace of deep meditation. Thus the Bhagavad Gita states in the 6th chapter, sequestered should he sit, steadfastly meditating, solitary, his thoughts controlled, his passions laid away, from every craving for possession freed. Wherever you are, whatever your outward beliefs and observances, seek God in the silence of your own soul. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. And from Whispers from Eternity, this is entitled, Master's titles are just so dull and boring. Listen to this dull and boring one. The title alone, The fire of my ambition and all my rainbow dreams are focused on thee. Isn't it wonderful? Just wonderful. The fire of ambition has been waxing strong, fed by the fuel of my evanescent rainbow dreams. As often as one dream faded away, a new one, as persistent as the last, burst open, flower-like in my heart, only to wither and die. The lightning of disaster struck, consuming not once but many times my garden of hopes, as flames destroyed even my very powers of renewal. My garden was once green with life, but as the gray ghosts of half-dead hopes and low vitality glided in, surrounded by dark doubts, I began to fear. Would they frighten me, as with timid footsteps I turned at last toward thee? Come to my aid, O divine friend. Give me the strength now to be ambitious only in my quest for thee. I'd like to begin by sharing with you a video prepared for Swamiji's birthday. This was created by a man named Dave Bingham at Ananda Village. He spent many, many years filming Swamiji. Those of you who have seen any videos of Swamiji, almost any of them that you've seen have been filmed by him. And so he created this video now that was shown at the celebration of Swamiji's birthday at Ananda Village. So some of you who were watching that online got to see it then, and we're going to see it again. I wrote to Dave and he sent the video to us.
Gertrude Walters was deeply religious. She told Swamiji that throughout her pregnancy with him, she was filled with an inward joy. Lord, she prayed repeatedly, this first child I give to thee. Swami Kriyananda. In the book of Matthew, it says, "Ye shall know them by their fruits." What were the fruits of Swami Kriyananda's life? Look into the eyes of his friends. Joy.
I first met Swami in early 1967, a little over 41 years ago. And literally, my lessons with him began at the very moment that I met him. He introduced, I had found, my brother-in-law had found his address after reading the autobiography. He was talking with someone about how wonderful that book was, and this person said, well, I know where there's a direct disciple of Yogananda who's living in San Francisco. We were in San Jose at the time, and gave us his address. And we went one Sunday afternoon and knocked on his door, and he opened it, a little apartment in the avenues in San Francisco, and he introduced himself, we introduced ourselves, and he invited us in and said, I'm working on a project, would you like to help? And when I said yes to that, that was the beginning of a long life of association. But so the relationship began immediately. Not only was he inviting me to join with him, and he's made that same invitation, as I've said, to many thousands of people. So that invitation to join with him, but that after that very afternoon, he did two things. One, we worked on his project, which was he was doing classes in San Francisco, and he was sending out a mailing. And so we were addressing envelopes and putting stamps on and stuffing the little flyer in and sending that out. But then we went out after we finished for a picnic in Golden Gate Park. And at that time, he began talking about a little bit about his life with Master. Just completely naturally, he began talking about the foods that we were eating and how food had certain qualities to it. And he talked a little bit about a few foods and the qualities. Bananas represent humility, and eating bananas helps you develop that quality. Cherries are for joy, and so on. And he talked a little bit about his life with Master, and he had the guitar, and he sang a couple of songs, and it was absolutely charming in that first afternoon. He not only captured my mind, but much more importantly, he captured my heart. And from that time on, I began taking classes with him. But that is, as I say, symbolic of the relationship that he's had with so many people. He's been a teacher, he's been a friend, and he's been a model of how to live. His whole life has been dedicated to helping us understand how to live life on a higher plane. You know, he was talking yesterday about how in that walk in Charleston, South Carolina, how he had that understanding that if there was a universal consciousness, only that could be God, an infinite consciousness. And it was our job to try to attune our consciousness to that. And the closer we came, the higher we were able to raise our level of consciousness, the closer we would come to that. And that is an extremely important kind of metaphysical concept that we should really understand. The whole of life is raising our consciousness and attuning it to God.
I find that my life has been enriched beyond possible imagination by trying to be as much like Master as I can be. But in my way, I don't adopt his accent, I don't adopt his expressions particularly, and yet I do try to feel, and this is my deepest and most constant prayer, may my thoughts be your thoughts. I pray that, I want that, and I find it is more and more true, so that a thought is implanted in my mind that just wouldn't have been there if I hadn't been thinking of him. You will see that the more you can focus yourself on this ray, And that doesn't mean to limit it to Master. It's good to pray to Sri Yukteswar. It's good to pray to Lahiri Mahashai. It's good to pray to Babaji and to Jesus. And from each one you will draw some particular quality, some particular virtue, some particular way of looking at things. This is all right and beautiful. But don't think that by clinging to your own opinion and your own personality, as unattractive as it may be, and imagining that this is you, it is not. You are the eternal spirit. And as long as you're manifesting in this world, why not manifest that particular aspect of this ray that will reach people in the way Master would? So on the one hand, the closer you come to God and Master, the more you will become completely yourself. On the other hand, the more you come to this ray and to these Masters, the more you will find that you become, in a human way also, like them. And your interests and your thoughts and your reactions will be their reactions and will be beautiful because of it. Joy to you and God bless you.
Well, of course, after watching Swamiji speak, it often feels there's no necessity to say anything further except, and now we'll have the blessing and the arati, but I wanted to share a little bit about my first experiences and impressions of Swami Kriyananda. I came to this path in 1996, and a friend had come to someone came to my college, and that's a whole different story, but essentially I was so impressed with this man. I guess I have to tell the story to say why I was so impressed with this man. So he came from Microsoft. He was, I was involved in the computer science club, and so they hosted him for a lecture on what was titled Creativity and Technical Disciplines. And he was essentially putting forth the idea that the kind of creativity it takes to write a poem or paint some, piece of art is the same creativity in essence that it takes to write a very sophisticated or fancy or elegant computer program. And for those of us who were already computer scientists, we were saying, yes, 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 of course. But, for most people, programming or whatever is sort of akin to plumbing, or, it's just sort of very kind of prosaic, dullard work, like having just a perfect Excel sheet. How perfect can it be? How beautiful can it be unless you change the font color or something? It's pretty much just a bunch of numbers, and so what? So he had this idea he was putting forth. I'm reminded, it's interesting, the same day of his lecture, President Bill Clinton came to our campus also and gave a big talk on for the elections that were coming up. So it's just interesting, all these years later, now Bill Clinton's wife is now running for president. And so anyway, it's a whole big thing, especially when you think that was 20 years ago. I can't even quite believe it when I say it. So this man, his name is Satyaki, came to the university. He spoke on this topic, and it was a good talk. But as many of you have heard the story, but I'll tell it again for if there's maybe one who hasn't heard it. He said that one thing you can notice is that those people with high energy, which is what it takes to be creative, they're always sitting up straight with straight spines. And I looked around and I noticed we were all kind of slouched like this. I myself was perhaps the slouchiest. And so I kind of, I want to be high energy and creative. He said, those guys are always the brightest guys in the room. It's like, I want to be the brightest guy in the room. So I sat up straight. And I found, to my surprise, that when I sat up straight, I felt more awake. That it was true, that I could feel, I wouldn't have known to call it energy, but I felt myself more present. And I thought, I mean, you have to understand, this was my senior year, and so it was just like, but no, I thought, all right, well, there's something to it. Then he said, if you need to raise your energy, you can also march in place and say, I am awake and ready. I am awake and ready. And, people were starting to, fidget a little bit and say, didn't somebody screen him before they let him in? You can't do that in a university lecture hall. And I was so impressed because I thought, this guy has something. And then he said, or you can say, I am positive, energetic, enthusiastic, like that. And at this point, people were getting ready to run for the door. And I just thought, this guy has guts. Because he jumped up, his shirt flew up, his little tummy was there, and he was just, and I thought, there's something in him, because no one would have the guts to do that, and they should. Because he was illustrating a point. He wasn't saying, you might, move your arms in a perpendicular manner and then at some point spring to the heavens, and you can imagine what I mean. He just showed us, and everything. So I said, I like this guy. So afterwards, I went to dinner with him and another student, pardon me. Shh. And I said to him, what do you do? Because he was very creative, successful, and so he was impressive enough to have attracted my attention. I was still very egotistical in those days, very fascinated with myself. I hope it's improved a little, I don't know. But at that point, it was definitely like, okay, you are worthy of conversation. And so he had passed that line, but he was also very centered. And I didn't even know that word. I wouldn't have described it that way. I described it in my mind as calm. But to me, who wants to be calm? I mean, you're calm when you're snoring, lying down on the bed. That to me is what calm was. I didn't understand dynamic calmness. In other words, he wasn't wasting any energy unnecessarily. He reminded me of sort of a martial artist who had complete power, complete possession over his powers and his body, and would spring into action if needed, but was not wasting any energy at all, uselessly. Whereas, I had the jittery leg and, sort of like, what's next, that kind of thing. And so I said, what is it that you do that makes you like that? And he said, well, have you heard of Autobiography of a Yogi? I practice yoga and I meditate. And I said, okay, I want it. And so he sent me a link to ananda.org. This was, the website I think had been up for about 3 months. I mean, it was a long time ago. And so anyway, that was my first impression, I said, of Swami Kriyananda. He actually, this man Satyaki had shown a few pictures and played some music from the mystic harp. So I had gotten a little bit awareness of Swamiji's music that way, though I wasn't quite aware of it at that time. And I was impressed by a student of his. That was the first thing that struck me. In fact, I was impressed by this man. That's what made me ask him, what do you do? But what he did were things that he had learned through Master and Swamiji's teachings, and I could see that there was something attractive about that. So that was the first impression, and then I read Autobiography of a Yogi and met Master, and I began to read. I also read The New Path, or The Path at the time it was called, and listened to Swamiji. I thought, if I'm going to meet this man, I should hear his voice, not just read his books. So there was recordings of him, his book, The Essence of Self-Realization, which is a collection of the sayings of Master that he compiled. He gave classes on the year that he published the book. And so it was during a spiritual renewal week, and so that was a week-long series of classes. So those tapes were available, so I bought those, so I could hear his voice and get to know him that way. And it was very nice, I enjoyed it, and so on. But it just took time for me to sift through all of the sort of preconceptions I had, not so much necessarily of the spiritual path. In a way, I was blessed to not have a lot of heavy religious schooling in one tradition or another. Whatever I saw, I thought, Vandam. And so that was that. I didn't see anything that I particularly resonated with. And in retrospect, I think that can be a blessing. Vivekananda said it's a blessing to be born in a religion. Sometimes it's a blessing to not be born in one, because you don't have all these sort of concepts you have to shed if they're not serving you. So anyway, I then met Jyotishji, Deviji, Ashaji, so many others of those students of Swami Kriyananda who had trained with him for so many years. And I was equally and more impressed by them, because here I saw that they were great souls, they were very centered, they were very joyful, and they were very different from each other in a way. Many more than just these three that I've named. But each one was more himself or herself in a certain way. It wasn't like everyone acted the same way and did all this in lockstep togetherness at all. But they had a certain similarity of vibration that was very attractive. And yet I could also see that each one was expressing it in his or her own way, which very much appealed to me, because that was authentic. You couldn't all just be a certain way unless you were putting on an act. And in fact, that was the conclusion that I had, that you could not make this up. You could not get this many people to act this way. In fact, an FBI agent visited Ananda village looking for some people. FBI is like CBI here. And so he said to Swamiji, "Have you seen any of these people?" And Swamiji said, "Why? Because I need to know why you're looking for them, because if I don't agree with whatever it is you're hunting them for, then I won't tell you." And he said, "Well, they've blown up some buildings and they're trying to, they've been terrorizing the government." And so Swamiji said, "Well, I'll look at the pictures." And he looked at them and he said, "I haven't seen any of them, but I can tell you right now that such people wouldn't even be attracted to a place like this." And so the FBI agent said, "Well, what are you all doing here?" Because he got curious. And so Swamiji began telling him about the community. It was in the early 70s, so it was only 4 or 5 years old. And so the FBI agent, the agent started asking, "Yeah, okay, fine, you're trying to have some new kind of civilization. How do you deal with your fights?" And Swamiji said, "We really don't have fights." He said, "Oh, come on. People are people. I don't believe it." So then he went and spoke with another member at the sort of guest services registration area. And she too said, we're basically peaceful and we meditate and we don't have fights. And he thought, okay, she must have been prepped, for the interview. And so on. And finally, at the end of it, this man just said, he didn't quite understand what anything of Ananda was, but he said, "That world out there is a jungle." Because he could see this was really the way people ought to live. Why? You don't have to be afraid of your neighbor, living in kindness and so on. As in fact, Mr. Kartikeyan said when he was the CBI director, he said he visited Ananda village, or maybe he was retired at that point, I'm not sure. And he just said, "The most amazing thing I've seen here, no one locks their doors." And you can imagine, the head of the police, what he's thinking, that no one locks their doors. I mean, that we would put him out of business because, part of your job at the police is somebody locked their door and then they broke it and then they stole it and no one locks their doors. There's no need to. And he would say that for years. I've been to Ananda communities. No one locks their doors. And so, the deer might come in and eat something off of your table there, but other than that, you don't have much to fear. So again, like I said, like this FBI agent, I was thinking, are these people for real? And I saw that you could not statistically, authentically make up this much of a sham for it to be true. That just the simpler explanation was that yes, they really were this way. And so that impressed me. Similarly, I went to see a graduation of students from one of the Education for Life schools. This one was in Palo Alto. This was a few years later. And the children were just, each year, the children receive, when they go from first standard to second standard or whatever, they also receive a quality like courage. And that is often, these qualities are given by the teachers who know them to demonstrate, for example, to be a quality that they demonstrated in that year. And sometimes with some of the kids, they would get the quality of patience, which was not only a recognition of what they were growing in, but also an affirmation of what would help them to grow into further. And so it had sometimes a dual meaning. Your quality is silence. I had wanted to give that quality out many times. So anyway, never mind. Not going into my school teacher days. So the children would give a little speech, about their quality, and it started every level all the way up. So a kid gets up in front of the microphone with the youngest ones. The teacher was there too, and they would give a little speech. Now, of course, you can imagine the kindergartners, which is KG or UKG. They did not say, "The meaning of patience has many implications," and I would think, first of all, as Aristotle has said, it was not like that. The kindergartner came up and said, "I love my teacher, Claire," and just hugged the teacher. It was so sincere and so sweet. And so you go on through the years and each one of these kids gives this speech. And again, I had that same thought. You couldn't make this up. There's no way that you could get this many kids to be so open-hearted and cheerful. And some were shy, also, which was natural. And yet for them to have so much joy, I said, I don't know what the educational system is, but I know that it works. And that was sort of the criterion I was applying to everything, because we can all talk about a happy, happy community. We can talk idea. We can all talk about a great spiritual teaching. We can talk about the need for spiritual practice. But a lot, we can promise everything. This will deliver. But we have to ask ourselves, does it work? That's really the only question. Does it work? When we come to the question of a spiritual teaching, it becomes a little more personal. Does it work for me? Because many paths may work for many people, as the reading was saying, but we need to find that one which works the most for us. Once we find that path and we find that it works, well, then it's just time to get to work. Just stick with it and go deep now that you've found your way. So, having said all that, I was impressed with whatever was happening because I saw that it was working. In fact, Swamiji said that to someone who visited Ananda village and said, "You have some wonderful people here." And Swamiji said, if you met one or two, you could say that they're wonderful people. But when you meet everyone, and they're all like that, then you have to say that it's what they're doing that makes them wonderful. And so what are they doing? Living a life of trying to blend spirituality and practicality. As Master said, simple living and high thinking, practicing Kriya Yoga, and also being kind to each other. This was a thought that came up yesterday during Swamiji's retreat, that we, on the one hand, are not here to glorify the ego, our egos or other people's. But on the other hand, some people in an effort to prove that the ego is Maya will then, instead of appreciating someone because it might inflate their ego, I don't want to inflate your ego, and just not only will I not appreciate, but in fact I will humiliate. And if you get offended, it just proves that you still have ego. What is offended? You can just imagine people will do that. It's ridiculous. Why? Because the saints don't act that way. They might challenge us. They might sometimes even poke us pretty hard if there's a delusion that we're hanging on to. And as Swamiji said, when Master would speak to him sternly, he saw regret in Master's eyes that he had to speak this way because it was the way that his message could get through. But that was done out of love. That was done with a calm heart. In fact, Swamiji said when Master would scold people, sometimes you'd think the roof would come off. And he said, I couldn't do it that way. because I would not feel that calmness in my heart. I would not feel that detachment. In one situation where Master was giving such a scolding to someone that the roof was about to come off, she was sitting on one end of the room, and there was another disciple standing or whatever, doing something on the other side of the room, and Master was striding towards her and thundering to make sure she got his impression, anyway, I won't even say about Mercury in retrograde and communication. I'm finding myself at a loss. What word is that? Trying to receive his message, trying to make sure his message made an impression. Anyway, thundering. And then he turned, continuing and thundering, and he saw the other disciple, and he would just winked. Another time, Master was yelling at someone, and there was another, speaking very loudly to someone, and there was another person sitting there and saying, okay, I see he's lost his temper. And in mid-sentence, Master said, and I have not lost my temper. He had perfect control. He was perfectly detached. This was interesting. Experience happened with a friend of mine who is psychic, and so she can sort of tune into what people are thinking or feeling. And she was with Swamiji many, many years ago, and they were at a gathering, and Swamiji said to someone who was not basically taking his advice after many, attempts or whatever, he said, I'm very disappointed. And the person But my friend said she could feel what Swamiji was feeling, and she felt he wasn't disappointed at all. That he was perfectly calm, perfectly joyful, perfectly loving and supportive of this person, but that he knew that this statement would make an impression, perhaps the impression that hadn't been made until now. And she said, I want to be like that. And so it wasn't that he was faking it or he was acting or whatever. You have to reach a certain amount of realization when you can do something like that sincerely. Again, it wasn't that he was trying to hurt the person, he was trying to help the person. But people in their efforts misguidedly can sometimes just start hurting everyone, just because, after all. Even Sri Yukteswar's disciples would do that. Sri Yukteswar was the habit, as Master said, of dissecting a disciple whenever and wherever he chose. No matter if it was in front of a huge crowd of people. And then other disciples of Sri Yukteswar would fall into the same line, as Master said, wise like the Guru. And they would also dissect people until Sri Yukteswar sent a few of his arrows in their direction. And then they would flee. You see? So we want to be kind. We don't want to be cutting. Swamiji was always kind. And as I said before, his legacy, he said, one of the principal parts of his legacy was that of kindness. You receive that, for example, in his book, Living Wisely, Living Well. He encourages you each day a different way to be kind. It's a beautiful thought, and one I read a quote recently from the Dalai Lama. Dharmini shared with me that he said, be kind whenever possible, and it is always possible. It's just so beautiful. So my impression of Swamiji again, at going back, was that I saw these people trained by him, and I saw what light they had. So I said, again, it must be working, whatever he's doing. And I was getting to know him. But then, at that time, he was living in Italy, and he wasn't coming to America. He hadn't come to America for a few years, or I had just missed him also. So I had come to Ananda Village in 1998 because he was supposed to also come. And so it was the 30th anniversary. I wanted to celebrate that with everyone. I guess in 2 years it'll be the 50th anniversary. Anyway, amazing. And so then we got word that he wasn't going to be able to come. And so I went anyway to Ananda Village, but I thought, well, I went from basically New York, I was in New Jersey, but it's near New York, to California, which is the other side of the country, to meet him, and he didn't come. So, well, then where is he? He's in Italy. So I decided I would go to Italy, and I would meet him. And I wrote to his secretary and said I would like to come to Italy, and he said, yes, that would be fine, and, it would be nice to see you and meet you and all these things. And then it was funny because he had told the secretary, whose name is Lakshman, told the people at the registration desk, a friend of Swamiji's is coming. And so I came up, as a funny story how I got there, but eventually I got there. At one point I was trying to say to someone in Italian, when is my stop? When is my stop? And I got so far as what was this stop? Then I tried to say, in how many stops is my stop? And the man said no. I was not making any sense, and he couldn't follow me. And the problem was, of course, I was having jet lag, and I had never really taken a train before, and I was not many times, especially not in Italy, and I was very sort of trusting, and as P.G. Woodhouse said, just a bright young child of nature. And so I was just lying and not worried like probably some of you would be, that if your child was just sleeping on the train in a strange country without any grasp of the language. And so at some point I found someone, and I kind of said, I forget now the name. It's not Valfabrica, but it's one other. It's another. I said, this train stop? And he said, uh-oh. And so then I got, okay. There's a person. I had to get off and take the train back in the other direction. Anyway, so I finally reached there, dragging my suitcase, and I was meeting the people at the registration desk, and they spoke English also, and so I was registering them. And one of them she was smiling, but she would, say, welcome, welcome, and just kind of stare at me. And then another time, and okay, I guess you can just, this is your room, and here's the key, and you can, pay here. And so finally, I just I don't think I even asked her, but she just kept staring at me, kind of like, are you sure you are who you say you are, kind of thing. So I finally, I don't know how it came up, but she said, I'm sorry, it's just that Lakshman said that some friend of Swami Kriyananda's was coming. So I just imagined some old man was coming, and here you are. I was very, very young. And so are you the one? I think so. And so anyway, that brings up another point, though, that Swamiji always viewed us as his friends, and that was his role, was to be our friend. It's very difficult in America for many people to naturally relate to the concept of a guru. And that's why you hear so many things that Master has spoken about in that, listen, you need a guru, and here is why, and all these things. And people say, I don't want to be dependent on anyone. I can make up my own mind. I'm an adult, for crying out loud, and all these things. And, you hear it not only in America, but in other countries, too. But anyway, on the other hand, you can get sort of the opposite in India, that people saying, the guru, of course I want a guru. But then there's a distance. That yes, there's a beautiful attitude of openness and surrender, which, as Swamiji said in a talk, it's everything to be open, everything. If you're open, you can go far. But still, that sense of distance can be there. And even as Arjuna said to Krishna after the Vishvarupa, can you just appear to me back again as my friend, because I find it too hard to relate to you in your omnipresent, thousands of heads state. The thousands of heads, by the way, means that you could see God in all the thousands of beings everywhere. It wasn't that he appeared like some Maharavana with 1,000 heads or something like that. But of course, if you take it literally, and that's sort of how it would be depicted, but it isn't what was meant. So anyway, Arjuna said, just be my friend. And Swamiji saw that that's what, of course, Master was a friend to all too, and Swamiji saw that's what people could most relate to. People who were inclined to say, I don't need a guru, but I could use a friend, and people who were inclined to say, the guru is all, but in fact it's sweeter to think of him as my friend, to think of him as interested in what I'm saying, interested in my spiritual progress, wanting to help me. As Swamiji said of Master, here was someone who I knew was always on my side. Even if it was in an argument with another disciple, who he was on that disciple's side too. But he's always on your side, always. So don't think that, as a Master said, that you have to chisel out your prayers to God or to Guru, lest you offend his aristocratic ear. And as some people think of God, Swamiji said, as this sort of tyrannical emperor, and if you just raise your eyebrow once in the wrong way, he'll just cast you into the dungeon. And so it's, that as another thing Swamiji said I love, some people think that they're going to reach heaven skidding across the marble floor, just barely making it. And it's just like we don't have to think that way at all. Don't you think the masters are pleased with someone who's interested in them? Not for who they are, but for what they bring? Don't you think they're interested in somebody who's meditating, who's practicing these teachings, who's trying to live a better life? Just statistically, it's a very small number of people doing that. And they're interested in the others too. But, I mean, if you're talking to someone and they're going like this, there's only so much you can say. But if you're talking to someone, meaning the masters are talking to you, and you're looking them, listening, and abdiya, and all these things, don't you think they'll tell you more? And if you offer and open your heart in love, aren't they going to respond? Oh, I guess you're feeling very loving today. Of course they're not going to act that way. So trust in their interest and enthusiasm in you, in your own spiritual growth. And so, finally, when I met Swamiji, I was sitting in the temple, and he was supposed to come in, but then someone said, he's ill and he might not give the satsang today. It was a Saturday. And I tried to withhold my disappointment. Then they said, no, he will give the satsang. So then he entered the temple, and I thought, somebody sick, and he was older at that point in his I guess he was in his 70s. Let's see, what year was it? 1998. So he would have just turned 70. And so, 99 actually, so 71. So, 71 and, sick. And so, he's sort of somewhat kind of shuffling, up to the front of the room. And it was not like that at all. When the doors opened, I somehow felt that they must have been blown off their hinges. I had never felt such an explosion of power all at once. And I was not, used to feeling such things. Like, well, that was a medium explosion, and that was a tiny explosion. I didn't feel any explosions ever. But it was as if there was a huge explosion, the doors flying off, this huge energy, electrifying, came into the room. And there was Swamiji. Everybody, of course, stood up to greet him. And he came to just striding down the aisle like a general. Not in an egotistical way at all, but he was like the master of the universe, it felt like to me. He went onto the stage, he sat down, he said, because there's a Kriya initiation tonight, let's meditate longer than usual in the satsang, and then I'll speak a little. So when he meditated, I was trying to meditate, and of course I had strategically placed myself in the front row, right in front of his chair, and was hoping that he might notice the unfamiliar face in the front row and so on. And I had sent a picture of myself after all, and that was a normal thing to do. And so I was sitting there meditating, just kind of like, ahem! Excuse me! Trying to anything I could do to get his attention. He was undisturbed. And I thought of, what could I stand up and nothing I could do to get his attention. And you never know what's going to happen when you meet someone like this, especially the first time. They might say something like, who is this radiant soul I behold in the front row? My child. Nothing like that. And so I just sat there. But what was happening was I was getting more and more agitated. And I thought, I'm meditating with Swami Kriyananda the first time I'm ever meeting him. I'm in his presence. The first thing we're doing is we're meditating, and I'm agitated. Somehow I know I've learned enough about yoga to know this is not right. I should not be feeling agitated. I'm wasting this opportunity. And I was also hot and just irritated. And I thought, this is the opposite of how I should feel in this situation. So what's wrong? And so I realized, in wanting to attract his attention, I was wanting to get something from him. And that seemed perfectly reasonable to me, except that I wasn't getting it, and I wasn't having a good attitude about it. So I thought, think of all that he's already given me. Think about all that he's given me if I never had even met him once. Through through all the teachers who he trained, who I was interacting with, through Ananda as a way of life, through Autobiography of a Yogi, and all of the books that he had written, but Autobiography of a Yogi in its first edition, that was the copy that I had gotten, which was published by Ananda. And through all of his recordings, everything was setting my life in a spiritual way, and these were all directly from him, to me. And of course to many others, but also to me. And I needn't even have met him to receive all this benefit of all these gifts he had given. So I thought, given that, let me just thank him. And so in my heart, I thanked him and offered my gratitude just for that. And then suddenly, it was as if this cool wave descended upon me, and I felt completely relaxed. And again, I was not prone to feeling cool waves or any waves. It wasn't like, some energetic thing that always happened to me. It never happened to me. But I felt it in that moment, and then I felt relaxed, and I was happy to just meditate with him. And then after some time, he gave a discourse in Italian and had these little headphones that people were, repeating the translation into for us non-Italian speakers. And then he got up and he strode out of the temple, and we all sort of followed him. In those days, he drove himself around from his home to the temple. It's a short distance away. And so I came up behind him, and I saw him greet somebody who was there from America, and he said, "Hello, Naidruva, how are you?" She was living in Italy and all this. And so I thought, well, there's my chance. So I said, I didn't quite tug on his back, but I said, "Swamiji, I'm Dharmaraj." And he said, "Oh, you're Dharmaraj. Somehow I thought you'd be taller." And I really didn't have anything to say to that because, well. And he said, "Isn't it funny how we build up impressions of people?" And then he said, "So how are you enjoying yourself?" I said, "It's wonderful. How long will you be with us?" And I said, "Just about a week." He said, "Well, I do hope we'll have a chance to talk," and so on, and bye-bye. And so he left. It was later, much later, years later, that I realized that when he was saying, "Isn't it funny how we build up impressions of people?" that he was also saying, "What impressions have you built up of me? Isn't it funny whatever impressions you may have built up of me? And why don't you forget those impressions and just get to know me inside, get to know me as I am?" And it also implies an openness to being, for someone to get to know you. In other words, he was interested that I get to know him. And not just me, but all of us. So keep these things in mind, that I do want to add just one last thought, which could have been the whole topic, that as much as we revere Swamiji and we revere Master, remember that they do not revere themselves. They revere God. And their only interest is not in bringing us to them. Swamiji opens his autobiography by saying, sometimes an individual, unremarkable in himself, becomes remarkable by his association with a great soul. I'm not saying it exactly as it's written. You should go look it up. But he was saying, listen, as much of Master as I can give to you, then my life has meaning. And we feel the same way. As much as we can share with you, and we all can feel this way, as much as we can share with someone, anyone, the joy that we are experiencing, and that is there to be experienced, if it is their path or not their path even, then that's something meaningful. Swamiji, having written all these books, having created these communities, having created all this music, trained all these hundreds of teachers and so on, and having touched the lives of so many through thousands of lectures, he said, I realize now the only meaningful work one can do, or that I can do, is to try to share the bliss that I feel with other people. If I can somehow share some of that bliss, then that to me is worthwhile. And so keep that in mind too. We have to serve. It's good to serve. There's lots of good things to do in serving and so on. But even then, in serving, we just want to share with others some of the joy we are feeling. And so Master also said in that, as you practice Kriya And as the light of God grows within you, then whoever sees your eyes shall change. And so remember that too, that your eyes can give so much more of a sermon than any words or any carefully chiseled out statements or even some perfectly logically crafted argument that this must convince people that there's a God. Never does. It's the heart that gets convinced, as Jyotishji said. Swamiji won his heart as he has won the hearts of so many of us because he's brought to us our master, our gurus, and God himself. God bless you. And now we will have the blessing and the arati. I've been forgetting this all weekend long. And I want to I want to stop forgetting it. You know, one thing that we also miss on Swamiji's birthday is that he would thank everyone for their gifts, for their blessings, and so on. And so he said, so you don't get to hear that. And so he says here in one of his letters, "Thank you also for your words of friendship. It has taken many hands to make the miracle of Ananda, masters most of all. Thank you for the part you are playing. God bless you."